The first story I wanted to talk about is titled Greg Locke Claims Tennessee Plans to Lock Up Unvaccinated People in Quarantine Camps. Let's see what Greg Locke is actually talking about. This article is written by Kyle Mantilla on rightwingwatch.org. Let's give it a read. Radical right-wing pastor Greg Locke used the service at his Global Vision Bible Church Sunday to attack Tennessee Republican Governor Bill Lee for supposedly signing an executive order giving the National Guard the authority to build quarantine camps in the state in which to lock up those who refuse to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Locke, who's long been an unhinged opponent of efforts to control the spread of COVID-19, recently announced that anyone caught wearing a mask in his church would be ejected. On Sunday, he used his sermon to rail against Governor Lee for signing an executive order easing some regulations in the state so health officials can better and more quickly deal with rising infection and hospitalization rates. Let's give this clip a watch by Greg Locke and see what he had to say for himself. This clip released early to mid-August, I think.
You see this nonsense our governor signed? People are like, well, there's really not a nefarious plan. Y'all just tinfoil hat wearers.
Yeah, I call him as I see him here. He is a little bit of a tinfoil hat wearer, I have to say. We'll get into that more in a second.
You need to adjust the rabbit ears on your TV because y'all just crazy. Really?
I love it. He's making the arguments for me. He's even throwing in some jokes. Yes, really. That's really how I view you, Greg Locke. Yes.
Why don't you read for yourself what our governor, which, by the way, will not get reelected, because I'm telling you, he is a coward I don't care how much he talks about Jesus. Bill Lee's a coward. You can tell him I said so.
Like he gives a shit what you think. Aside from that, Bill Lee is actually a pretty hardcore Republican. So I hope Greg Locke is correct here in saying that he's not going to get reelected. It's Tennessee, though. I'd be willing to bet he probably will. We'll see.
Lee's a coward. You can tell him I said so. He's a noodle. He's a waffler. Willy-nilly nonsense.
Well, listen to the language on this self-proclaimed man of God. He's a noodle, a waffler, and full of willy-nilly nonsense. That is some shit. Can you imagine a man of God saying this, using this type of language? Jiminy crickets.
Nonsense. Opening up Tennessee to this bunch of craziness going on. I ain't voting for him again. I'm ashamed I voted for him the first time. By the way, Trump ain't going to endorse him either. I can promise you that right now. But nonetheless.
I thought about cutting that part out, the Trump part, because how relevant is it? It's not really super relevant, and I needed to shorten the clip up. But I decided to leave it in because it shows that Greg Locke is really only concerned with Donald Trump, Donald Trump's movement, and Donald Trump's endorsements. That's it. The guy is obsessed with Trump, believes that he is still currently the president and should be calling the shots if he isn't, and things like that. Like, it's pretty unhinged from reality.
I can promise you that right now, but nonetheless. Did you see the executive order he just signed for COVID-19? It's like 22 paragraphs long.
As a matter of fact, I have the executive order pulled up, and we'll take a look at it in a second, because this guy made some unsubstantiated claims about it, so we're going to debunk them. But let's keep listening.
You know the two things that bother me the most? Call me whatever you will. This is the facts. The facts, Jax. The facts.
Oh, we'll be the judge of that in a second when we look at the executive order.
Two things. Well, three things. One of which is anybody that has a medical license can now practice in Tennessee from out of state, which is unconstitutional, super, super dangerous, and that is very unlawful.
So anybody who has a medical license in the United States can practice medicine in Tennessee. I'm not seeing the problem with that. Why is that an issue? Is that an issue solely because this guy believes that the United States should basically be structured more like the European Union, where they're all separate, distinct states that have complete control over their own governments, and the EU is just kind of a governing body who just kind of exists and imposes some taxes on some states for some things? I mean, it's more of a loose structure than a strictly controlled federal government. Is he shooting for like a European Union type thing with the U.S. rather than what we have, which is a federal government and a state government? That's my only interpretation of his complete hatred for the U.S. government. I thought this guy's supposed to be a patriot. Love it or leave it, right? What happened? I don't understand.
They're talking about all these hospitals are overflowing with people. Why don't you carry a camera in one of these hospitals that's supposed to be overflowing with COVID patients and show me how empty they are? These chicks are in there doing TikTok dances.
No, they are actually full. I don't know what the situation is with Tennessee, but Texas and Florida particularly are getting hit pretty fucking hard right now. They're doing really, really badly. And there are only a couple of ICU beds left in the entire state of Texas, I think. I don't remember. We're going to have to fact check me on that one. But they are full. I don't know what else to say here. I mean, he's just going to deny the facts. What else is there to say? But you're incorrect. So next he's going to tell us what was in the bill, the executive order that the Tennessee governor signed that he didn't like, okay? Check this out.
Number one, he has authorized the power of the National Guard to get involved in issues of COVID-19.
I'm not understanding why that's such an issue. The National Guard is basically the state's military. I used to live in West Virginia, and there was this giant, like, chemical poisoning thing where they... so when they mine coal, they clean the coal with this chemical. They wash it, basically, right? And they were storing this chemical that they use to wash the coal in this giant bin. Well, this thing sprung a leak, and it all leaked into the Kanawha River, which is right near the capital in Charleston. And it's the water supply from Charleston all the way to, like, Taze Valley and parts of Hurricane and Milton. Pretty far. It's a good 50 miles, I would say, right? Poisoned the water supply. It was a big fucking deal. The states called in the National Guard, the state's military, to pass out bottled water to people, because this isn't something that could be boiled out. This is something that needed to be refined out, condensed out, basically. So it was a really, really big deal, and the states called on their military to help with the situation. I don't understand the whole fear-mongering thing about hating the National Guard. I thought he loved the military. What happened? I thought he was a patriot, once again.
Here's what's interesting about that. We look and we're like, well, the National Guard should get involved. You know what bothers me more about the National Guard getting involved? They've authorized the Tennessee Department of FEMA to build what they call, in its own authorized pages of a signature, quarantine camps.
Is that true? First of all, conspiracy theorists like this guy have a huge problem with FEMA. There are so many conspiracies revolving around FEMA, it's ridiculous. What's it stand for? Federal Emergency Medical something or other. Hang on, let me look it up. Federal Emergency Management Agency. So FEMA comes in when there's some emergency that needs to be dealt with, and they help people. Back when COVID really started to hit, Trump sent 2 giant cruise ships from FEMA, one to the East Coast, one to the West Coast, to help. FEMA is not this big evil organization who, like, is embroiled in all these conspiracies and shit. Like, this is full-blown conspiracy theory. That's it. There's nothing else to it. But he said FEMA was building quarantine camps. He said that in the clip just now, right? He claimed that this guy put it directly in the article, directly in the executive order. So let's read this section on Right Wing Watch, and then we're going to take an actual look at what it says. This is Right Wing Watch. In addition to the fact that authorization to build temporary quarantine facilities is mentioned in Section 18, not Section 8 of Lee's executive order, everything else Locke said about it is wrong. The order does not give the National Guard the power to imprison those who refuse to be vaccinated, but merely states that if temporary quarantine or isolation facilities need to be quickly constructed in Tennessee, the state, in an effort to speed up the process, has suspended regulations that require plans for the construction of new healthcare facilities to be pre-approved and certified as meeting applicable state and safety requirements. Let me take a quick look. It's Section 18 of this. Let's see, Section number 18. It's a total of 9 pages long. This guy said it was like 23 pages long or so. That's just incorrect. This is the entirety of the executive order that we're looking at on screen here. This is Section 18. Temporary quarantine and isolation facilities may be constructed. This is standard cookie-cutter shit that any governor needs to sign to basically govern, to manage things, to deal with the pandemic. It's not about locking people up in quarantine facilities or whatever the fuck. He's just a conspiracy theorist. Adjust those rabbit ears, like he said a minute ago. This is the executive order, Section 18. The provisions of Tennessee Code annotated Section 68-11-202C18 are hereby suspended to allow for the construction of temporary structures, the plans for which would otherwise be subject to review for new construction, additions, or substantial alterations as directed by the Commissioner of Health and the Director of FEMA in response to COVID-19, provided that there shall be inspections of such structures to ensure safety as necessary. So basically, what this executive order, this Section 18 of the order did, was make it so that they can quickly construct facilities that would have existed anyways and deal with the state regulations and inspections as they go, rather than having to pass through red tape, because this is an emergency situation. They need more room, they need more buildings, things like that. Once again, Greg Locke, please adjust those rabbit ears on your head.
I ain't talking about East Germany, I'm talking about Tennessee.
Oh, here we go. Now we've gone back to the World War II analogies.
Quarantine camps.
That's not what this is. This is basically about suspending construction inspections for facilities, for required facilities, until such a time as it's possible to do those inspections safely. That's basically what this situation is about.
For the uninformed people that are still in refusal to be vaccinated. If that don't bother you, you might as well show up at another church next week, because I'm going to keep raising Cain about all this nonsense.
This really is nonsense, isn't it? He called it. This would bother me if it was real. It's not. As he said a second ago, he's spouting complete fucking nonsense.
Nonsense. I don't care what Bill Lee says. I don't care what fraudulent fake Joe Biden says. I don't care what Planned Parenthood says. I don't care what Chris Cuomo says.
They don't care what you say either. I'm not getting it. Like, what's the point here?
I don't care what Gavin Newsom said. I don't care what Nancy Pelosi and her insurrectionist nonsense has to say. They hate us. We are speed bumps to the deep state on the road to their progressive communism.
Nobody in a position of power in the United States has any interest in instituting communism or socialism. And by the way, Greg Locke, they are not the same thing, contrary to popular belief. I don't hate the guy. I'm just, like, fucking blown away by, like, where his head is at. Like, it's so hard to wrap your mind around such conspiratorial, bizarre thinking. I've said this before, and this is probably a little bit controversial, I'll be honest, but I don't hate anybody for anything. I feel bad for this guy, even though he's a perpetrator of dangerous disinformation. He's a propagandist. He's also a victim in his own way. He was raised in an environment that fostered the personality that we see today. The personality that we know and love is the direct result of his upbringing, of his beliefs, of his experiences through life. I feel bad for the guy and I wish things had been different for him.
And I'll shout it from the rooftop if I'm the last one. I live by what I say, and I will die by what I say if I have to. I'll fight this garbage until my dying breath.
Here's a persecution complex again. You have to have a persecution complex with any good cult. Creates a sense of camaraderie and group loyalty. Anyways, there's another clip I wanted to watch by Greg Locke. One more clip. This one came out, again, in early to mid-August. It was very recent. Let's give this one a watch and see what Greg Locke had to say.
We have a big old sign that says, this is a mask-free church. We won't even let you wear a mask on our church campus.
Why? What's the point of that, by the way? If, a reporter wants to come in and record so that it can get out to the media or whatever, which we all know Greg Locke absolutely loves. Why not let him wear a mask? Who gives a shit? Why is it Greg Locke's business? You know what that's called? He's limiting people's freedoms and liberty by banning masks. They want to make a choice, make a decision for themselves, their own bodily autonomy to wear a mask, and he is infringing on their rights to make personal decisions for themselves. The exact thing he's been bitching about this entire fucking time. And here we are. This guy is infringing on other people's rights and is proud of it. Does he not see the hypocrisy here? The hang-up in this situation is that I'm trying to apply rationality and reason to somebody who doesn't have it. I'm trying to understand a situation from a perspective, from this guy's perspective. I'm trying to understand what motivates him and why he does things from a logical, rational standpoint. And it's getting me nowhere because he's completely devoid of logic or reason. His whole reason for doing any of this stuff is to own the libs. That's it. He just wants to hurt his enemy. That is the nature of extremism. He wants to hurt the people who he has decided he hates, or who he's decided hate him. And anything he can do to that end, he will, even if it hurts him to do it, even if it gets his congregants killed. He doesn't give a shit. He'll do it anyways. That is extremism. That's what extremism is. An ends justify the means mentality. They're willing to do anything to destroy their enemy. An us versus them, good versus evil mentality, which we've seen plenty of with Greg Locke. And a number of other things. That's what makes extremism what it is. I'm actually writing a whole paper about what extremism is and how to identify it. Gonna put it on my website at some point, and then I'm going to put it in a book sometime soon. Think that'll be pretty interesting. Let's keep listening.
We celebrate faith over fear because God's not given us the spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind.
Interesting. So let me just step back about 10 seconds and listen again.
We celebrate faith over fear.
Faith over fear. Okay. I was on Twitter the other day, and he was using that hashtag. And I saw somebody underneath when Greg Locke was saying faith over fear. We won't bend to fear. We're not going to wear masks and live in fear at this church, blah, blah, blah. I can't take credit for this. It was somebody beneath him in the Twitter thread. But they said something like, if you are all about faith over fear, then I guess that means you're banning guns from your church too, right? Because you have no reason to be afraid. God is with you. You don't need guns. Nobody needs guns, right? If you don't fear the virus because God has you in his arms, you shouldn't fear like an armed robber or anything either, right? Again, trying to apply reason and rationality to somebody who doesn't have it. His primary goal is to hurt his enemies. That's it. He doesn't give a shit about being a hypocrite or any of that other stuff. He gives a shit about hurting who he's decided is his enemy.
Break faith over fear, because God's not given us the spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind.
He's such a showboater, isn't he? I just want to point that out. Like, he's a very good public speaker. Disgusting human being. Propagandist to the core, a node of disinformation, but he knows how to pull a crowd in, and really that's the heart of the issue, isn't it?
So I said, okay. I said, we're going to have to go ahead and deal with this right now, since the media's here, since they're trying to shut us down.
Nobody's trying to shut him down. Nobody has tried to shut him down this entire fucking time. What is he even talking about? This is part of the persecution complex all over again. He is obsessed with the idea that people are out to get him. Nobody gives a shit about him. They just want him to be safe and give a shit about the people around him by having them wear masks and get vaccinated. That's it.
Since they're trying to shut us down, they need to know that we are both biblical and constitutional. So I said, we so believe in our First Amendment right to gather that if you show up and you impede on our First Amendment right to worship, we gonna meet you at the door with our Second Amendment right, because we are not closing our church because the government told us to. That's what we gotta do if we gonna take this nation back for the glory of God.
That's terrorism right there. That's terrorism. He's encouraging his congregation to use their guns to get what they want, to use violence to get what they want. An ends justify the means mentality. He's willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish his goals because he believes his goals are worthy. He believes that it's worth it. He doesn't give a shit. He looks over it. Just completely ignores the fact that it's not okay to threaten violence against people. A second ago, he said something like, if you try to take our First Amendment rights or freedom of assembly or whatever else, then we're going to meet you with our Second Amendment rights. Your rights end where my rights begin. I guess this hasn't clicked in his head. He's never heard this concept before, but this is a concept that the founding fathers believed in. This is what the Constitution was built upon. Your rights end where mine begin. Me preventing you from violating my rights is a protection of mine, not a destruction of yours. You have a right to swing your fist wherever you want in the world until it reaches my nose right here. You can't swing it here. That's not a destruction of your rights. It's a protection of my rights. This guy says that he has a First Amendment right to assemble. And that's true. 100%. Absolutely. Unless it interferes with my right to life and health. The moment he interferes with my right to life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness, the government is justified in preventing him from violating those rights of mine. But this isn't even crossing his mind. All he gives a shit about is himself. What's going on with him and with his congregation. That's it. His whole goal is to destroy his enemies. That's it. And that means us, ultimately. That's why he's willing to go out there and talk about using his Second Amendment rights against us.